I've got Aaron in Phoenix, Arizona, who asks, why do I not believe in Jesus? What would I accept as evidence of the resurrection? I kind of touched on this. Are you there, Aaron?
I'm here.
I kind of touched on that a minute ago. That's kind of why I went to the resurrection. I don't know what would count as good evidence for a resurrection. I would think that if we're speaking resurrection, I would need good evidence that the person was dead, verifiable, testable evidence the person was dead, and then verifiable, testable evidence that they were alive after that point at which they were dead, with some significant time gap, because we can resuscitate people in the short term and in specific circumstances. It's not that I'm opposed to thinking that somebody came back from the dead. It is the specifics of the story aren't supported by available evidence. It was evidently a single instance occurrence. And even if I were to believe that it happened, I still wouldn't have any way to know how or why it happened. How do you rule out other unknowns?
Okay. So, of course, we can't bring back that event, and not knowing or not observing that situation, there's no way to test that to see if it was true.
Well, not only
I agree with that.
But the only evidence for the resurrection of Jesus are in the Gospels.
Yeah. What? So there's no evidence that you would accept to.
I'm willing to accept
that was true.
I'm willing to accept that the gospel authors are accurately writing what they heard or believed to be true. In the same way that if my mom comes and tells me that she was abducted by aliens, I don't think my mom is lying to me. I'm willing to accept that she had an experience that she is trying to describe in that fashion, but that doesn't tell me what actually happened. And so when we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are anonymous gospels, not written by those names, ages ago when we can't investigate, and you have an oral tradition that is ultimately written down where the facts and the details don't line up, what can we say from those books happened at all if we don't have independent confirmation of this thing?
Okay, let's go back real quick to the resurrection. Okay, so is there a possibility that it could have happened?
I don't know. I have no reason to think it's possible. How could you demonstrate that it's possible?
Yeah, because we both can't go back in time and observe that situation. So there's a possibility.
No, there's not a possibility until a possibility is demonstrated.
Why not?
The fact that you can't show it's impossible does not mean it's possible. Just like the fact that you can't show that it's possible doesn't mean it's impossible. Both possibility and impossibility would need to be demonstrated.
That makes no sense. Like, you can't say that it's impossible.
Right.
You can't prove that it happened or didn't happen.
How can you say something is
It actually
possible? How can you say something is possible just because nobody's been able to show it's impossible?
And how could you say that it's impossible if nobody showed that it was possible?
Exactly. And if you were listening to me, I literally said just that. Both possibility and impossibility would need to be demonstrated. So you don't get to claim it's possible, and I don't get to claim it's impossible. What I said when you asked me if it was possible was I have no reason to believe that it's possible. There's been no demonstration of that.
Exactly.
He's not saying that he is convinced that it is impossible. Those are two different things. Do you understand that?
I'm saying that.
Do you understand that, Aaron? Before we move on.
Exactly. Yes.
Do you understand that not being convinced that it is possible is different from being impossible?
She can't hear you because of the delay, Aaron. You have to be a little more patient with these calls because we're not on our regular call service. So I cannot claim that a resurrection is possible, and I can't claim that it's impossible. What I can say is there is no good evidence that this has in fact ever occurred, which, given the way we normally view things are not demonstrated to be, or not considered true until they're demonstrated to be true.
Yeah, with that information that you just stated, there's no possible evidence that we can bring back up. We cannot recreate that event because that event requires God raising Jesus Christ from the dead.
Yeah.
So why do you believe that it happened?
Whose fault is it that we don't have good evidence? Let's assume for a second that there is a God who came down and took human form and sacrificed himself to serve as a loophole for rules that he's in charge in, resurrected, and now 2,000 years later, we do not have good evidence, do not have access to evidence that would warrant believing that. Whose fault is that?
It depends what you accept as evidence.
No. I said, let's imagine the scenario where a God does all this and we get to today and we don't have sufficient evidence to warrant belief. Whose fault is that?
Once again, it depends on the evidence that you accept. For example, one second. For example,
no, we're not 1 second.
Do you want me to explain?
No, I don't.
Or not?
No, I don't. Because
why are you asking me questions?
Well, I asked you a question, but you're answering a different question.
And I'm explaining.
No, you're not. I asked you, whose fault is it? And you said it depends on what evidence you accept. But in my scenario, we have already acknowledged.
Explain fully.
I'm gonna hang up on you in about 3 seconds if you don't let me finish talking. In my example, we had already gotten to the point where we cannot test because we don't have a time machine. And you had acknowledged this was a single instance occurrence that we cannot investigate. And I asked, whose fault is that? And it has nothing to do with what standard of evidence. We already acknowledged that the standard that we are unable to achieve is that we cannot properly investigate this. Whose fault is that?
Okay, that would be the atheist's fault. I want to explain why.
Nope, it's God's fault. And
wait, I want to hear why.
Oh my God. Okay. No, it's fine. Jen wants to hear why. Please explain why it's the atheist's fault that the creator of the universe created a scenario where we both agree we have no ability to test a scenario.
All right, thank you. So if you let me explain, I'll explain. So you mentioned right now about testing the scenario. So the evidence that you are looking for is to test something. You cannot test a past event. That's the first thing. Number one.
Whose fault is that?
Wait. You can't.
Whose fault is that? Why can't we test? Did God create everything? Did God create a universe in which we can't test past events?
Are you going to let me finish my?
I want you to answer that question rather than dodging. In your view,
what about your first question?
In your view, did God create a universe in which we do not have the ability to test past events like this?
Okay, of course we cannot test past events.
That's not what I fucking asked. In your view, did God create the universe in which we cannot test past events like this? Yes or no?
We cannot test past events.
I asked you.
I want to answer your first question.
Shut the fuck up!
He's going to pick which question he's going to answer.
I asked you a yes or no question. In your view, did God create a universe in which we are prohibited from testing instances like this in the past? Yes or no?
Okay, let me explain.
No, I asked you a yes or no question.
I'm going to answer.
You don't need to tell me, let me explain, and you don't need to say I'm going to answer. I asked a yes or no fucking question. Yes or no better be the next word out of your mouth, or I will hang up.
I'm going to answer.
Goodbye.
I don't know.
So here's the thing. Here's why his brain would not let him answer that simple yes or no question, because it gets to the point that I was making. The first question is, in your view, did God create a universe where we are prohibited from exploring, testing properly events in the past like this? That's an obvious, easy yes that any honest person could answer if they believe that there's a God who created anything. He didn't want the follow-up question. The follow-up question is, could God have created a universe in such a way that we could reasonably test and investigate events like this in the past? Because that question gets to the heart of it. If God could have created it differently, then it's on God. It's God's fault.
I don't know that he necessarily believes that you have to be able to test it to believe it.
Well, I know that he does not believe that.
Right.
That's why he wants to keep going to it's the atheist fault, because you just have different standards of what's test.
Right.
I don't care about that. He agreed that we can't test that event in the past. And so here's the thing. Either God could have created a universe in which we could test the past, which I don't know what his answer to that is, because he wouldn't answer the first one. But in either scenario, we are at a point where we cannot reliably test those past instances.
Mm-hmm.
And if you believe them, that they're true, in the absence of reliable testing, then you aren't being skeptical. You have to apply that same sort of claim universally, which means when voodoo priests claim to raise people from the dead, you need to accept that. When somebody in some other religion claims to live off of prana and not actually eat food, they get all of their energy from the sun and they never eat, you have to accept that, even though those claims are more testable in the sense that we can go out and investigate them. Evidently, chat says that Alice doesn't exist, which is funny, because evidently Alice is in chat, and I don't know. It was a distraction, and my apologies, because we've run about 22 minutes over, but I wanted to make sure that we got in all the calls that we got in this kind of extended live long show. It's frustrating because you work to figure out what is the best question I could ask,
right,
that gets them to a state of understanding the difference in this.